Yo, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to Bullony Basketball. Here with Johnny. How's it going, Johnny?
What's going on, Garrett? Not a whole lot has changed here. Fighting over a cold, so if you guys hear it in my voice or see it, apologies. But other than that, just living the same old life.
Yeah, and I mean, same thing here. We got I feel like more variety this week than we've had in a lot of recent episodes, so that's always good. Usually we're talking in depth about certain players, certain teams. We don't have too much of that, but we have a lot of different stuff to talk about. The first one isn't really NBA related, but of course, March Madness came to an end on Monday with Baylor actually knocking off the undefeated at the time Gonzaga team. What did you think of the championship game and really how the tournament played out?
Yeah, I was really looking forward to it, and it didn't play out as I had envisioned. I personally thought Gonzaga was going to win, but beyond that, we just didn't see a good basketball game. Baylor dominated from the start, high pressure, high intensity. What we did see were the two best basketball teams all year long, so it's great to see those two teams meet. Whether or not Gonzaga was just unprepared or exhausted from their game against UCLA a couple nights ago, that I don't know. But all props to Baylor. They deserve it. Probably the best backcourt in college basketball all year long. High intensity defense. So if there's a team that deserves it, it's Baylor.
Yeah, and you gotta realize that Gonzaga was playing the late game on the Final Four day. They also had the longer game and went to overtime, which is pretty rare for them this year. I believe that was their second of the whole year. So I mean, a team that's undefeated at that time, they were 30-0 going into that game. Then they got to go play Baylor after that, who had a pretty, you know, cakewalk game against Houston per se. It wasn't really much of a challenge, and they got done earlier. So, and I mean, really, they just couldn't miss. I mean, Gonzaga might have been the more talented team, and if their shots were falling, then there's a good chance that they end up winning that game. But they just really couldn't make shots, and Baylor came out right away, and they started, I believe, on a 9-0 run, and then they just didn't look back. So, I mean, it's tough. Like sometimes that happens, especially with two teams that good. You can maybe afford it against an 11 seed like UCLA, like Gonzaga did, but when they're playing a team like Baylor, it's kind of hard to come back from it.
And everybody's saying that Gonzaga's overrated, that Gonzaga doesn't play in a legit conference and all this, but they beat like 7 or 8 ranked teams all year long. Like their non-conference schedule was packed. They beat Kansas, they beat Iowa. I don't have the list of teams on my in the top of my head, but they beat a lot of very good teams early on, and they are a very good team. They won 12 straight games by double digits. Like you don't do that. No matter who you play, it's impressive, right? Like Division I college basketball is Division I college basketball. To keep beating teams by double-digit points is impressive in itself. So nothing to be taken away from a great season.
Yeah, and it makes it, I think, even look more impressive what IU did in like the 1970s when they went undefeated all the way through. But I mean, let's move on now. Let's talk about one of the more funny or chaotic experiences over the past week. ESPN, they are cutting ties with Paul Pierce over, an issue that happened on an Instagram Live. I don't know if you ended up seeing the video, but it was, I guess pretty unprofessional to say the least. What do you think of this decision, and what do you think of the way Paul Pierce handled it?
I mean, ESPN didn't really have a choice. Like a company that big, if you don't do that, the backlash and the perception of your company just goes down. So I understand why that was done. Um, Pierce proceeded to post a lot of stuff like, "This is funny, I'm laughing, this and that." He'll find a gig somewhere, whether it's Barstool. I've seen that. I've seen that in the rumor mill. So I don't think he's too worried about that. So it was in everybody's best interest. Like both parties had to do it, but ESPN had to be the one to come out and say, "We're firing you." So nothing really unexpected there.
Yeah, I mean, this doesn't really do anything for either side. I mean, ESPN is still going to be extremely successful without Paul Pierce, although I think that he did add a lot in being there. You know, his takes were pretty controversial, but that's what always made it more entertaining to watch. And I mean, Paul Pierce, I mean, this is a guy who's made probably, what, like $200 million over his career. So I doubt that he's, kicking himself for losing a gig at ESPN. I mean, I can understand why they would let him go. Of course, also, I mean, he is an adult. So it's like, I mean, it is kind of weird. I don't really know how to put it because you've seen other people in, a position like that, whether a professional athlete or a celebrity, and then they don't really get anything in return, like for that. Like they don't get their job taken away or something where they're breaking negotiations with another company or organization. So from that respect, it's like I don't know really why it was like so serious, but I mean I can understand it, and it just seems really funny. I mean, if you saw Shaq on NBA on TNT the other day, he talked about Paul Pierce, and immediately he just started laughing, saying his name. So it just seemed like a funny situation.
Yeah, and I don't know if part of it's due to COVID protocols too, like where they do something like that. Which if it's COVID protocols, it's pretty harsh way to get somebody fired. But whatever the case is, both sides are going to be just fine in the end. Like you said, a funny situation that came about.
Yeah, I think in the end, both parties will find a way to keep winning, per se. Speaking of two parties that keep winning, we got the Denver Nuggets and the Dallas Mavericks. Of course, Dallas lost yesterday to Houston, but up until that game, I mean, they were on like a 5-game winning streak. Denver, I don't believe they've lost since Aaron Gordon has been in the lineup. So, what do you think of, these two teams? And do you think that they could give serious challenges to these other teams in the West and maybe even in the finals if they can get there?
Denver is a real contender, yes. Aaron Gordon has meant everything to that team. He's replaced Jeremy Grant and more. He's averaging, is it the same amount of points on like an incredibly low amount of touches or like dribbles per game, like where everything he's getting is like a putback or an assist, like where he's not even dribbling, he's just literally catching and shooting or catching and dunking. So it's been a match made in heaven for Jokic. He's helped bring athleticism, he's helped bring defensive versatility to help Jokic out, so he's done a lot. So I think Denver is now in a firm position of contender in the West. Dallas isn't a contender in the West, but Dallas is a team that could give these contenders a run for their money in a second round matchup, or even a first round, because they'll probably end up facing one of the contenders in the first round matchup. So I think they're a team that can give a run. They can give a contenders team a run for their money. You look at what they did last year without Porzingis; they took the Clippers to 6 games. So I think it's viable that something like that happens again this year, but I don't think they have enough to make a real push.
Yeah, in terms of the Mavericks, I mean, they always have that potential to, challenge some of these teams like the Lakers, the Clippers, Jazz, Suns, or any of those top teams this season. They've just been kind of inconsistent, I'd say. Like sometimes they'll go on big winning streaks and they'll go on big losing streaks. Some people are out of the lineup too much, so it's kind of hard to expect them to make too much noise this year. They could win a first round matchup for sure, but I don't know if like they can get to the conference finals or really contend this year. Whereas Denver, I think that they can. I think that making the Western Conference Finals last year, now adding Aaron Gordon, who I thought originally I was a little skeptical about because, like you said, he's been playing so well without having the ball in his hands, and that was something that he really excelled in Orlando and not so much the other way around. So this is kind of like a little surprising, at least for me, that he's been playing this well. But, I mean, if he continues this, then they could be a serious team in the West. The only thing that I'm a little scared of, and, I mean, not too much, but, I mean, trading away Gary Harris in order to get Aaron Gordon, because Gary Harris, yeah, he's always been injured, but I think over the last few years, he hasn't really been a regular season guy. He's always been big in the playoffs, and he's always been the guy that guards usually the best perimeter player on the other team. So, I mean, who's going to take that responsibility? Is it going to be um, Will Barton, or is it going to be Aaron Gordon moving into that role and playing as like a lengthy, taller defender? It'll be interesting to see, but I know that he did a very good job and he has that experience. Now we're going to see how the team goes forward with Aaron Gordon.
Yeah, I think we're going to see Gordon and Barton take on the two best perimeter players, and then they're going to slide Porter to the 4 on defense, assuming that he can play like, I guess if we look at the Jazz, like Porter would guard at somebody like Ingles, whereas you can then throw Gordon on Mitchell or something like that. So I think they're going to match up defensively like that. So I really do like Denver. I was always high on Gary Harris, but his time has passed. I don't think he is what many thought he was going to be. And injuries are a big part of that. So I don't think that loss is ultimately going to make huge difference come playoff time.
I mean, time will tell. I mean, Aaron Gordon has some experience with the Orlando Magic, not too much like Gary Harris has with the Nuggets, but I mean, we'll see. Playoffs are getting closer and closer. And one of the teams that's been gearing up pretty well in the past few games has been the Los Angeles Clippers. They, got Rondo back against the LA Lakers. This is when he made his debut. They got Patrick Beverley back the other night. And then they also added DeMarcus Cousins, who's on a 10-day contract. And really the only piece that they're missing right now is Serge Ibaka. So, I mean, looking at what they did, especially to Portland the other night, these Clippers players, the Clippers are back. But do you think that the Clippers are, back in the sense where we can start looking at them as a serious team?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how you don't look at the Clippers as a serious team, regardless of what happened last year. They have Kawhi and they have PG. Rondo is Rondo, and come playoff time, you get the real Rondo. So that trade wasn't a regular season trade. That trade was made for the postseason. So I don't know how you don't take him serious. Serge Ibaka is a big upgrade. Zubac is playing well. They have the talent. It's just a matter of whether or not they put it together. So I don't think you could count them out. I think that they're firmly in the contender position.
Yeah, I also believe that they are firmly contending in not just the West, but also in the whole NBA. Especially if, the Lakers, LeBron's going to come back, AD's going to come back, but we're going to see necessarily how good that team is with those two, the addition of Drummond and how it all flows together. They just picked up Ben McLemore as well, so we'll see how all that flows together when they come back. And, if they're not 100%, I think that a team like the Clippers could have a good chance against them. I think that they still have a pretty good chance against them, even if they are 100%. I know people wouldn't favor them, but I think that they're very capable of pulling off that upset in most people's minds. And then if you go to, the Eastern Conference, they're arguably the deepest team in the whole NBA. So if they got to the NBA Finals, anything could happen. They go about 11 or 12 deep. They'll likely keep DeMarcus for the rest of the season. I think he played really well the other night against Portland. So I think that they have a lot to look forward to for the remainder of the season. I think this is how they were playing too before, COVID hit last year. They started playing really well with Kawhi and Paul George, and I believe they won 13 straight when both of them had played. So it's kind of like we're seeing the same thing, only this time I doubt there's going to be a big 4-month break in between. So we'll see maybe what could have been last year with this year's postseason with this team.
Yeah, I think they're contenders. I think you have to take them as contenders. And if they scuff up in the playoffs again, they do it. If they get to the finals and lose to a team like the Nets, I think the Nets are just a better team. But their expectations are to certainly make the finals, at least make the conference finals and go from there. And I think they're in a good position to do so.
Yeah, and there's no shame in if they lose to a team like the Nets or the Lakers, because I feel like most people would pick them this season over the Clippers. But maybe if they lose to one of those other teams, and especially if they lose before the conference finals, then maybe people are going to start looking at that again and look at a cursed franchise per se. Um, but I mean, let's move on to a debate that we saw them talk about on ESPN earlier this morning. Yesterday, the Jazz and the Suns played, and the Suns came out on top in overtime. But, Donovan Mitchell had like 41 points. I believe Devin Booker had like 36. So if you're looking at these two this season, I mean, this is a common debate. I think we talked about it some last season of Bullony basketball, but who do you got in this debate right now?
I'm leaning towards Devin Booker. I've always been the Donovan Mitchell guy, and it's always been because Donovan Mitchell's been in the playoffs. Donovan Mitchell has done things in the playoffs. Booker never had a team around him. Booker has never played with an all-star until he got Chris Paul. But now look at what the Suns are doing. And Booker's putting up those same numbers. He's a good playmaker. He's a better defender now. And I'm interested to see what he does in the playoffs, because if he has a good showing in the playoffs, I think it's Booker then for sure. But we've just always been so hesitant to take Booker over Mitchell because we've said Mitchell's been the number one option in the playoffs. But Mitchell's had a Rudy Gobert. Mitchell's had good shooters around him. And so now that Devin Booker has those same things or similar players, similar supporting cast that Donovan Mitchell has, we're seeing what Devin Booker can do, and I think it's really starting to show.
Here's what I'll say on this. Most people would say that even if Donovan Mitchell is the best player in the Jazz, that the most important player is Rudy Gobert because he's like the anchor of the defense. But, I mean, as important as Rudy Gobert is to the Utah Jazz, I mean, Chris Paul, we've already talked multiple times about the Chris Paul effect in Phoenix and the way that he's, helped that team become a lottery team every single season to now one of the top two records in the Western Conference. But I'm looking at like what Donovan Mitchell and the Utah Jazz are doing this year. They've consistently still been the top team in the NBA. Whether or not they've lost to the Phoenix Suns, I mean, they're still above them in the standings. You look at scoring-wise, they're always going to be pretty identical. If you look at what they've done in terms of facilitating and playmaking for the other teams, I would say that Mitchell's been a little bit better this season. He's averaging more assists. He's averaging less turnovers. And he's actually, surprisingly, I don't think many people thought this would happen, but he's been a better shooter from distance this year than Devin Booker, which is a bit weird because I feel like when Donovan Mitchell came in, he had like the slasher label kind of on him, a little bit like a Dwayne Wade comparison. And then you look at Devin Booker, people were talking about Kobe Bryant more so, and he's obviously been the better deep range shooter. So I don't know, it's very close. But what I will say is that would we have seen Devin Booker do in the playoffs last year what Donovan Mitchell did? I know they lost, but it's still pretty impressive. And until we see that from Devin Booker, I'm going to have to lean towards Donovan Mitchell on this one.
And that's 100% fair, right? And we've seen Devin Booker always had to do everything, and now Chris Paul's taking some of the pressure off of him. Mitchell was always that guy. Now they have a point guard in Conley who can take some pressure off of him. So we're seeing both teams be able to bring a true point guard next to their star so that they can still be the focal point of the offense, but not have to do everything where they've always had to do everything.
And the one thing I will add is that a lot of it boils down to opportunity. I mean, if you look at both Booker and Mitchell, neither of them have really been labeled great defenders per se in their time in the NBA. But I mean, if you look at what Rudy Gobert brings to the team, he's the defensive anchor, which, leaves for more room of Donovan Mitchell to create on the offensive end. Whereas, Chris Paul, he's bringing it on both ends every single night. So, I mean, that kind of maybe diminishes a little bit of what Booker has to do. And I guess, in a sense, that would probably lean me to pick Donovan Mitchell, at least right now. I mean, we'll see what happens in the playoffs. That could obviously tell a bigger story because the playoffs are more important. But that's kind of my mindset of this debate right now, as we're about a month away from the playoffs.
Yeah, and there's not a wrong answer. It's kind of who you feel is the better prototype, who you build around. Like, there are so many different ways that you can consider the question, and it's important to understand that.
Yeah. But I mean, as we mentioned earlier in the show, we talked a little about DeMarcus Cousins getting that 10-day contract with the Clippers. He wasn't the only person to get a 10-day contract over the past week. We also have Isaiah Thomas with the New Orleans Pelicans. This isn't too crazy because the Pelicans right now they're sitting outside of not just the playoffs but the play-in. But what do you think of Isaiah Thomas? And do you think that he can start to prove himself once again in this spot?
Yeah, I don't know how much he has to prove. It's great to see Isaiah Thomas get another shot in the NBA. For him, I think he just wants to be out there and playing. Obviously, everybody wants to play for a contender. Everybody wants to be a piece on a championship team. But when you're out of the league like Isaiah Thomas was, he just wants to play. And so the Pelicans gave him that opportunity, and he's taking advantage of it. He might have to, I guess, if you want to say, prove that he's healthy, prove that he can stay healthy. But other than that, I think there's very little for him that he has to prove.
I would say the one thing he has to prove is that if he can still contribute at a normal roster spot on an NBA team. Now, personally, I think that he can. I think that it was kind of ridiculous how guys like him and DeMarcus Cousins and some of these guys just got kind of blackballed from the league for a while, and then like now they're just now getting like 10-day contracts, which isn't right. I mean, this is a guy that just 3 or 4 years ago averaged like 29 points a game and was top 5 in MVP voting. So it's just weird to see him like go from that to the second or third string point guard getting a 10-day contract to show if he's going to stay on the team or not. And it's not even a great team either. Like the Pelicans are probably like a bottom 10 team record-wise this year too. So I don't know. I think that he deserves at least a chance, and I like that he's getting it. But hopefully for his sake that he can get like a surefire, roster spot in time.
Yeah, the stuff happens quick in this league, man. You can be at the top of the mountain 1 year, and 2 years later you could find yourself all the way at the bottom. So can't take any of those moments for granted. Got to make sure that you stay healthy. Got to make sure that you keep that work ethic. And if you do that, you should be fine. Unfortunately, Isaiah Thomas had injuries along the way, but it's great to see him back out there on the court.
Exactly. But speaking of injuries, we had someone return from injury who was, for most of the season, I would say the MVP favorite until he suffered this injury, and that is Joel Embiid for the Philadelphia 76ers. I believe they are back in the first seed in the Eastern Conference. I don't have it in front of me, but I know that they've been playing a lot better recently. They got a big win the other night against the Boston Celtics. So what do you think of Joel Embiid's return and what this could mean for the Sixers getting closer to the playoffs?
Yeah, so obviously important. Nothing I need to see out of him other than the fact that he has to stay healthy. Like, he's firmly out of the MVP conversation at this point, just because of what he's missed. So he's everything to the Sixers team. Like, they can't win without him. But with that, like, I don't need to see him go out there and drop triple doubles or anything like that. I just need to see him put up numbers that Joel Embiid is used to putting up and not get injured again before the playoffs. Like, that is literally the only thing I'm looking for out of him.
Yeah, and I mean, I couldn't agree more. The MVP, it would be nice to know it was his goal, but, guys like Jokic, Dame, Giannis, they've been playing pretty much all year long. You could even argue Harden, because I don't think he's going to miss nearly as much time as Embiid did. So, I think those guys would probably be more suited for the MVP race than Joel Embiid, unless he just came out and, dropped, 40 and 20, over, the next 5 or so games, but I don't see that happening. I don't think that he'd care that much about it. They're currently the best record in the Eastern Conference, and I think while an MVP is nice, I think a championship might mean more to him, and it could also help him a lot more as well.
You'd think. Like I said, I don't even think it matters what he does in these last set of games, barring some history or record that he puts up. I just think he's out of the MVP race. Jokic has not missed a game, and he's putting up amazing numbers and Denver's winning again. So I think he has a pretty firm hold on number one. And then you got guys like Dame and Giannis behind him. So I think with that being said, Embiid is just on the outside looking in.
Yeah, and I mean, that is a tough pill to swallow, but I think the championship, of course, would mean more to him and the team. We're going to move on to our daily picks, starting with April 9th. We have the Rockets and the Clippers. Who's taking this one?
I expect the Clippers to win this one.
And I agree with you. I got the Clippers, too. On the 10th, we have the Raptors and the Cavaliers. Who you got here?
I have Toronto.
I also have Toronto. It could be close, but I'm going to go with the Raptors on that one. On the 11th, we have the Celtics and the Nuggets. Do you think the Nuggets will remain undefeated in the Aaron Gordon era?
I do.
As do I. I got the Nuggets winning that one. On the 12th, we have the Bulls and the Grizzlies. Two teams that will likely be in a play-in spot by the end of the season. Who do you got on this one?
Yeah, this will be a good game, but I think the Bulls will actually win this one.
I got the Bulls as well. They've been playing a little better recently, so hopefully they continue it. On the 13th, we have the Miami Heat and the Phoenix Suns. Who you got on this one?
Yeah, this will be another good game as well. I think Miami wins this one.
I also think Miami will win. But yeah, it could go to Phoenix very well, but I'm going to take Miami. On the 14th, we have the Wizards and the Kings. Not too great of a game per se, but who you got here?
Yeah, dumpster fire of a game, but I'm going to take Washington.
I'm going to go with the Wizards as well. And on the 15th, we have the Celtics-Lakers, an old rivalry, but likely without LeBron, without AD, and with the Celtics struggling and haven't had Kemba Walker in the last few games. Who do you got here?
I like Boston. As long as AD and LeBron are out, I think Boston wins.
I'm going to go with Boston as well. I don't think that either of them should be back by then. I think AD is projected to come back a little before LeBron is what I saw recently, but I don't think they'll be back by then, so I'm going to go with Boston. And I believe we had the same picks this week for all 7.
Yes, I do as well. Looking through it, yep, I think we do.
That might be the first time that that's happened all year. I feel like it's usually that 6th day because we almost always have the Hornets there, so it's just, I guess, weird.
Yep, absolutely.
But I think that's going to close out the show. I hope you guys enjoyed. Any final thoughts?
Nothing. Kind of gearing up towards the latter half of the season, so we'll get a better idea of seeding. We'll get a better idea of playing games. Biggest thing to monitor, honestly, is just health of the players on the contenders. So we shall see what happens.
We're getting closer to the playoffs, which is always the most fun time of the year. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you guys for watching, and we're out. Peace.